I was staring at the violation notice taped to my front door when I realized the Cascade Ridge Homeowners Association had finally lost their minds. The fine was for $300 because I hadn't cleared the snow from my driveway within the required 4-hour window after the storm ended. Never mind that I'd been out there at 5 a.m. with my snowblower, finishing up by 7:30. According to the timestamp on their complaint, filed by none other than Deborah Patterson, the HOA president, the storm had technically ended at 3:47 a.m., and I should have been finished by 7:47 a.m. I was 13 minutes late. I crumpled the notice in my fist and looked out at the pristine street in front of my house in this God-forsaken development outside of Boulder, Colorado. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Deborah was busy timing my snow removal down to the minute, she had no problem with the fact that I'd been the one clearing the main roads through our neighborhood for the past 3 winters. Not because the HOA paid me, not because it was in my property agreement, but because I had a commercial-grade plow attachment for my truck, and I actually gave a damn about my neighbors being able to get to work. My name is Nathan Richardson, and I'd lived in Cascade Ridge for 5 years. When I'd first moved in, the place seemed perfect. Mountain views, reasonable HOA fees, and a community that actually felt like a community. But that was before Deborah Patterson got elected as HOA president 2 years ago. Since then, the woman had transformed our peaceful neighborhood into her personal fiefdom, complete with increasingly absurd rules and astronomical fines for the smallest infractions. I pulled out my phone and called my buddy Marcus, who lived 3 houses down. "Did you see this?" I asked when he picked up the fine. "Yeah, man, I got one too. Apparently I left my trash cans visible from the street for an extra hour last Tuesday. $200. This is insane. We pay HOA fees for what exactly? They don't maintain anything. They don't plow. They don't landscape the common areas anymore. What are we getting for our money?" "Deborah's power trip, apparently," Marcus said. "There's a board meeting next Thursday. You should come." "Oh, I'll be there." But Thursday was a week away, and I had a more immediate problem. Another storm was rolling in that night, and it was supposed to dump at least 18 inches on us. The National Weather Service had issued a winter storm warning for the entire Boulder County area. I looked at my truck sitting in the driveway, the plow attachment gleaming in the weak afternoon sun. Then I looked back at the crumpled violation notice in my hand, $300 for being 13 minutes late. Fine. Let's see how they liked it when I followed their rules to the letter. That night, the snow started falling around 8 p.m. I sat in my living room, drinking coffee and watching it accumulate through the window. My wife Sarah had taken our daughter Emma to visit her parents in Denver for the week, which meant I had the house to myself. It also meant I had no one to talk me out of what I was planning to do. By midnight, there were already 6 inches on the ground. By 3 a.m., the snow was still coming down hard. I checked the weather radar on my phone. The storm was expected to continue until around 6 a.m. I set my alarm for 9:30 a.m. and went to bed. When I woke up, the world outside was buried under 21 inches of fresh powder. The snow had stopped at 6:14 a.m. according to the Weather Service. That gave me until 10:14 a.m. to clear my driveway under the HOA rules. I had plenty of time. I took a long shower, made myself a proper breakfast with eggs, bacon, and toast, and read the news on my tablet while I ate. At 9:30 a.m., I finally bundled up and headed outside with my snowblower. The machine roared to life, and I methodically cleared my driveway and sidewalk. I finished at 10:05 a.m., a full 9 minutes before the deadline. Then I went back inside, made myself another cup of coffee, and waited. The text started coming in around 10:30 a.m. Marcus, dude, are you plowing today? I can't get out of my driveway. Then Jennifer from across the street. Nathan, the main road is completely blocked. Are you okay? Then Dave from the corner house. Hey man, not sure if you're sick or what, but any chance you can do the roads? I've got to get to work. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I opened my laptop and started documenting everything. Screenshots of the weather service data showing when the storm ended. Photos of my cleared driveway with timestamps. A copy of the violation notice with Deborah's signature. I had a feeling I was going to need all of this. My phone rang around 11 a.m. It was Deborah Patterson herself. Nathan, this is Deborah from the HOA. I'm calling because several residents have expressed concern that the neighborhood roads haven't been plowed yet. Okay, I said, my voice perfectly neutral. Well, we were wondering when you plan to take care of that. People need to get to work and emergency vehicles can't get through. I'm sorry, Deborah, but I don't understand. What does this have to do with me? There was a long pause. You've been plowing the roads for the past few years. That's correct. I've been volunteering my time, my equipment, and my fuel to do something that the HOA should have been handling all along. Yes, well, we've appreciated that, but people are counting on you. I got a $300 fine yesterday for finishing my driveway 13 minutes past the deadline during the last storm. That was after I spent 6 hours plowing the entire neighborhood's main roads for free. So I've decided to focus my efforts on compliance with HOA regulations instead of volunteer work. Another long pause. Nathan, let's not be hasty. If you felt the fine was unfair, you can appeal it at the next board meeting. Oh, I plan to. In the meantime, I suggest you arrange for professional snow removal services. I believe there are several companies in Boulder that offer commercial plowing. That's not in our budget. Then I guess residents will need to arrange their own transportation until the snow melts. Have a good day, Deborah. I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking slightly. I'd never been one for confrontation, but something about that fine had pushed me over an edge I didn't even know was there. For 3 years, I'd been subsidizing the HOA's complete failure to provide basic services, and this was how they thanked me. The phone started ringing again immediately. I let it go to voicemail, then again, and again. By noon, I had 17 missed calls and 23 text messages. I ignored them all and made myself lunch. Around 1 p.m., there was a knock at my door. Through the window, I could see Deborah Patterson standing on my porch, wrapped in a designer coat that probably cost more than my plow attachment. I considered not answering, but curiosity got the better of me. Nathan, she said when I opened the door, her smile so forced it looked painful. Can we talk? Sure, what about? May I come in? It's freezing out here. I didn't move from the doorway. I'm comfortable talking right here. Her smile faltered. Look, I think there's been a misunderstanding about the fine. If you plow the roads today, I'm sure we can work something out. What kind of misunderstanding? The violation notice was pretty clear. Storm ended at 3:47 a.m. I had until 7:47 a.m. to finish. I finished at 8 o'clock a.m. That's a violation according to the rules the HOA board passed last year. Rules you voted for, if I remember correctly. Those rules are meant to maintain neighborhood standards, not to punish people who are actively helping the community. Funny how you didn't mention that when you were filling out the violation notice. Or when you denied my appeal 3 months ago about the fine I got for having my garage door open for 20 minutes too long. Or when you fined the Hendersons for planting the wrong color flowers in their front yard. Deborah's expression hardened. This is childish, Nathan. People are trapped in their homes. Mrs. Chen has a medical appointment she can't get to. The Johnsons can't get their kids to daycare. You're being selfish. I'm being selfish. I've saved this HOA thousands of dollars in plowing costs for 3 years. I've gotten up at 4 a.m. in blizzards to make sure people could get to work. And the one time I'm a few minutes late because I was exhausted from doing the HOA's job for free, you fine me $300. That's not selfish. That's called learning a lesson. So this is about money. Fine. The board will reimburse you for the fine if you plow the roads today. It's not about the money, Deborah. It's about respect. It's about the fact that you've turned this neighborhood into a nightmare of petty rules and ridiculous fines while providing exactly zero value to the people who live here. What do we get for our HOA fees? A quarterly newsletter. Really? We maintain the property values by ensuring everyone follows the guidelines. You maintain your own sense of importance by bullying people over minor infractions. There's a difference. Deborah's face flushed red. You know what? Keep your plow in your garage. We'll hire a professional service and bill you for your portion of it since you're clearly too immature to be a team player. You can't bill me for services I didn't request or agree to. That's not how HOA fees work. But please, hire a professional. That's what you should have been doing all along. She stormed off my porch, nearly slipping on the snow in her impractical boots. I watched her struggle to her car, a massive SUV that she apparently didn't know how to drive in snow, and slowly navigate her way down the unplowed street. It took her 15 minutes to go 3 blocks. I closed the door and sat down at my kitchen table. Part of me felt guilty. My neighbors really were trapped, and some of them had legitimate needs. But the larger part of me was tired of being taken advantage of. If I gave in now, nothing would change. Deborah would rescind the fine to save face. I'd plow the roads and everything would go back to the way it was until the next time she decided to assert her authority. The doorbell rang again. This time it was Marcus. "Man, what are you doing?" he asked when I opened the door. "Half the neighborhood is losing their minds." "Come in," I said, stepping aside. Marcus stomped the snow off his boots and followed me into the kitchen. I poured him a cup of coffee and explained the situation, showing him the violation notice and walking him through the timeline of events. "Okay, I get it," he said when I finished. "Deborah's been out of control for a while, but people really do need to get out. Mrs. Chen isn't just missing some routine appointment. She needs dialysis." That hit me harder than I expected. I didn't know that. "Yeah, usually her son drives her, but he can't get his car out. They called an ambulance, but it's stuck at the entrance to the neighborhood. The main road is impassable." I set down my coffee cup. "The entrance is blocked." "Yeah. There's a drift probably 4 feet high where the wind piled it up. Nothing's getting in or out." I thought about Mrs. Chen, who always waved to me from her garden and had brought over homemade dumplings when Sarah and I first moved in. I thought about the ambulance stuck at the entrance, unable to reach whoever might need it. "Okay," I said. "I'll clear the main entrance and the primary road to Mrs. Chen's house. But that's it. And I want everyone to understand why this is happening. I'm not doing this because the HOA asked. I'm doing it because our neighbors need help, which is why I was doing it in the first place." Marcus nodded. "Fair enough. Want some help? You got a shovel, always." We bundled up and headed out to my truck. The plow attachment had been sitting ready all winter, and it started up without issue despite the cold. Marcus followed in his Jeep as I slowly made my way to the neighborhood entrance. The drift there was even worse than he'd described, probably closer to 5 feet at its highest point. I had to make multiple passes, and even then, Marcus had to get out and shovel the compacted sections that the plow couldn't handle. It took us 90 minutes to clear a path wide enough for the ambulance. The paramedics waved their thanks as they passed, headed toward Mrs. Chen's street. I followed, clearing the main road as I went. By the time I reached her house, they were already loading her into the ambulance. Her son caught my eye and mouthed "thank you" as they drove away. I just nodded. Marcus and I cleared a path back to the entrance, and then I parked my truck in my driveway. The rest of the neighborhood roads were still buried, and I intended to keep them that way. The reaction was immediate. My phone started buzzing with angry messages from people who wanted to know why I'd only cleared certain streets. One message, from someone named Janet who I'd maybe spoken to once in 5 years, called me a disgrace to the community. Another, from a guy named Preston who drove a Tesla with a license plate that said Preston 1, demanded I clear the road to his house immediately so he could get to his important business meeting. I deleted all of them without responding. That evening, I got an email from the HOA board. It was a formal notice informing me that I was being fined $1,000 for selective snow removal that created dangerous and discriminatory conditions within the community. The email, signed by Deborah Patterson, stated that by clearing only certain roads, I had demonstrated willful negligence and malicious intent toward the residents of Cascade Ridge. I read the email 3 times, each time getting angrier. They were actually fining me for the emergency access I'd provided, for helping Mrs. Chen get to dialysis, for making sure an ambulance could reach our neighborhood. I forwarded the email to my lawyer, a guy named Tom Rodriguez who'd handled my house closing 5 years ago. Then I started researching Colorado HOA law. What I found was enlightening. By 2 a.m., I had compiled a comprehensive document outlining every violation the Cascade Ridge HOA had committed over the past 2 years. Failure to properly notify residents of fee increases. Lack of transparent financial reporting. Fines that exceeded the amounts specified in the original HOA bylaws. Board meetings held without proper notice. And most importantly, the assessment of fees for services not rendered. I also discovered something interesting buried in our HOA bylaws. Any homeowner could call for a vote to recall the entire board if they collected signatures from at least 30% of the neighborhood residents. We had 212 houses in Cascade Ridge. I needed signatures from 64 homeowners. I spent the next morning calling and texting everyone I knew in the neighborhood, explaining what was happening and asking if they'd be willing to sign a recall petition. The responses were mixed. Some people were enthusiastic, having dealt with their own Deborah issues over the years. Others were hesitant, not wanting to rock the boat. A few were openly hostile, accusing me of being a troublemaker. But by the end of the day, I had commitments from 47 people. I needed 17 more. The next day brought another snowstorm, this one smaller but still significant. About 8 inches fell overnight. I cleared my driveway in plenty of time and then went back inside. The neighborhood roads remained untouched except for the route to Mrs. Chen's house, which I cleared again because I'd be damned if she was going to miss dialysis because of my dispute with Deborah. The complaints on the neighborhood Facebook page were getting vicious. People were calling me every name in the book, saying I was punishing them for Deborah's actions, that I was being petty and vindictive. A few people defended me, pointing out that I'd been volunteering for years, and that maybe the HOA should actually do its job, but they were quickly shouted down. What nobody seemed to understand or want to understand was that this wasn't about punishing anyone. It was about establishing that I wasn't the HOA's unpaid employee. If they wanted the roads plowed, they needed to arrange for that service like every other HOA in America. The fact that I'd been doing it for free didn't obligate me to keep doing it forever, especially not after being fined for my trouble. Tom Rodriguez called me on Wednesday morning. "Nathan, I've reviewed everything you sent me. I think you've got a solid case against the HOA for the fines. They're definitely overstepping their authority, but I have to ask, are you sure you want to go down this road? HOA disputes can get ugly." "It's already ugly," I said. "Have you seen the Facebook page?" "I have, actually. My wife is in the group, which brings me to my next point. I'd like to help you organize this recall petition. Pro bono." "Why?" "Because I live in an HOA community too, and I'm tired of seeing boards abuse their power. Deborah Patterson is a perfect example of what happens when people get a little authority and no oversight. She needs to go." "What about the fines? Can I fight those?" "Absolutely. The latest one especially. You can't be fined for snow removal. You're not obligated to plow anyone's roads but your own, and even that's questionable. The 4-hour rule is probably unenforceable anyway. It doesn't account for the size of the property, the physical capability of the homeowner, or equipment availability. We can definitely challenge that." "Good. Because I just got another violation notice this morning. This one says I'm being fined $500 for failure to maintain neighborhood standards by refusing to provide customary services." Tom was quiet for a moment. "They put that in writing?" "Yep, it's right here in my email. Nathan, save everything. Every email, every violation notice, every text message. Deborah Patterson just handed us a gift. She's essentially admitting that they've been relying on your volunteer work as a mandatory service, which means they've been defrauding every homeowner by not providing the services covered by HOA fees." "What does that mean?" "It means this could turn into a class action lawsuit. It means every homeowner in Cascade Ridge might have grounds to sue the HOA for breach of contract. And it means Deborah Patterson and the rest of that board could be personally liable." I felt a grim satisfaction settle in my chest. "How do we proceed?" "First, we get those signatures for the recall petition. I'll draft the language tonight. Second, we file a formal complaint with the Colorado HOA office. They have regulatory authority over homeowners associations. Third, we start organizing the other homeowners. If we're going to do this, we need to do it right." Over the next few days, Tom and I worked on gathering support. He created a detailed breakdown of where our HOA fees had been going for the past 3 years. The results were damning. Deborah had given herself a salary of $30,000 per year for her role as HOA president, something that wasn't authorized in the bylaws. The vice president, a woman named Carol Simmons, was receiving $20,000 annually. The secretary and treasurer, both friends of Deborah's, were getting $15,000 each. Together, the 4 board members were taking $80,000 per year out of the HOA budget. Meanwhile, actual maintenance had been slashed to almost nothing. The landscaping for common areas was now done by a volunteer committee, which meant it wasn't done at all. Snow removal was resident-provided. Even the quarterly newsletter was just a 2-page Word document that Deborah emailed out. When Tom presented this information at an impromptu neighborhood meeting he organized at the community center, the room exploded. People were shouting, demanding answers, asking why nobody had noticed this before. The answer, Tom explained, was that Deborah had been deliberately obscure about the finances, providing minimal reporting and dismissing questions as handled by the board. "This is embezzlement," someone shouted from the back of the room. "It's not quite embezzlement," Tom said carefully. The board did vote to approve these salaries. However, they didn't get homeowner approval, which is required under Colorado law for any payment to board members that exceeds $5,000 annually. So while it might not be criminal, It's definitely a violation of HOA law and the bylaws." "What can we do about it?" Marcus asked. "We recall the board, we elect new members, and we file a lawsuit to recover the unauthorized payments. It won't be quick, and it won't be easy, but it's the right thing to do." By the end of the meeting, I had more than enough signatures for the recall petition. In fact, I had 137, well over the required 64. The tide had turned, and Deborah Patterson knew it. She sent me an email that night. It was brief and to the point. "The board has decided to rescind all fines against you. We hope this resolves the matter and we can move forward positively." I showed it to Tom. "What do you think?" "I think she's scared, but don't accept it. We're past the point of simple resolution. This needs to be fixed properly, or it'll just happen again with the next board." The recall election was scheduled for 3 weeks later, per the HOA bylaws. During that time, Deborah and her allies mounted a desperate campaign to save their positions. They sent out emails claiming that the recall was based on misunderstandings and personal vendettas. They argued that board compensation was normal and necessary to ensure qualified leadership. They even tried to claim that I had been plowing the roads as part of a personal snow removal business and should have been paying the HOA for the privilege of accessing neighborhood streets. That last claim was so absurd that it actually hurt their credibility more than helped it. Several people who'd been on the fence about the recall were pushed firmly into the pro-recall camp by the suggestion that I'd been profiting off my volunteer work. Meanwhile, more snow had fallen. 2 smaller storms dropped a combined total of 14 inches on the neighborhood over 10 days. Each time, I cleared my own driveway and the emergency access route to Mrs. Chen's house. The rest of the neighborhood remained buried. People were carpooling from the cleared areas, parking at the entrance and walking to their homes. It was inconvenient, but it was manageable. Deborah finally broke down and hired a professional snow removal company, an outfit from Boulder called Rocky Mountain Snow Services. They charged the HOA $12,000 for a one-time clearing of all neighborhood roads. When the invoice went out to homeowners as a special assessment, dividing the cost among all 212 households, people lost their minds. $56 per house for a single plowing, when they'd been getting it for free for 3 years, was a wake-up call about the real value of what I'd been providing. The Facebook page turned into a war zone. Some people blamed me, saying I should have kept plowing regardless of the fines. Others blamed Deborah for alienating me in the first place. A few pointed out that this was exactly what HOA fees were supposed to cover, and where had that money been going all this time? The recall election took place on a cold Tuesday evening in February. The turnout was unprecedented. According to the bylaws, we needed a simple majority of votes cast to recall each board member. Tom had organized a slate of replacement candidates, including Marcus for president, Jennifer from across the street for vice president, and 2 other neighbors who'd been vocal about HOA reform. When the votes were counted, the results were decisive. Deborah Patterson was recalled by a vote of 156 to 41. Carol Simmons lost 163 to 34. The secretary and treasurer didn't even bother to show up for the vote, effectively resigning by default. Marcus was elected as the new HOA president with 178 votes. The reform slate won every position. I thought that would be the end of it, but Deborah wasn't quite finished. 2 days after the election, I received a certified letter from an attorney in Denver. Deborah was suing me personally for tortious interference with community services and negligent infliction of emotional distress. She was seeking $50,000 in damages. I called Tom immediately. "Can she do this?" She can file a lawsuit for anything she wants. Whether she can win is another question, and the answer to that is no, she can't. This is a frivolous suit designed to intimidate you. We'll file a motion to dismiss, and then we'll countersue for harassment and legal fees. This is insane. Welcome to HOA disputes. I told you they get ugly. The lawsuit dragged on for 6 weeks before Deborah's attorney quietly filed a dismissal. Tom told me later that he'd threatened to depose Deborah about the unauthorized board payments, and she'd decided to cut her losses. The whole experience left a bad taste in my mouth, but at least it was over. Marcus and the new board got to work immediately. Their first action was to hire a forensic accountant to review the HOA's finances for the past 3 years. The results confirmed what Tom had suspected. Deborah and her cronies had taken nearly $250,000 in unauthorized payments over their 2 years in power. The new board voted unanimously to file a lawsuit against the former board members to recover the funds. They also voted to hire Rocky Mountain Snow Services on a seasonal contract, paid for out of the regular HOA budget, which they'd reorganized to eliminate wasteful spending on things like Deborah's community outreach initiatives, which appeared to consist mainly of expensive lunches. As for me, I went back to my normal life. I still cleared my driveway after every storm, always within the required time frame, though Marcus had led the charge to change that rule to something more reasonable. The 4-hour requirement was replaced with a 24-hour window, with exceptions for medical conditions, travel, and equipment failure. I also started plowing the neighborhood roads again, but this time with a formal contract. The HOA paid me a fair rate for my services, less than they'd been paying Rocky Mountain, but enough to cover my fuel, equipment maintenance, and time. It felt right. I wasn't doing it out of obligation or fear of fines. I was doing it because I wanted to help my neighbors, and they were compensating me fairly for that help. Sarah and Emma came back from Denver a few weeks after the recall election. I told Sarah everything that had happened, expecting her to be upset that I'd caused such a commotion. Instead, she hugged me. "I'm proud of you," she said. "You stood up for yourself. That's not easy. It got pretty messy. Standing up for yourself usually does, but look at what you accomplished. The whole neighborhood is better off now. People are paying attention to where their money goes. The board is actually doing its job. That matters." She was right. The neighborhood did feel different now. People were more engaged, more willing to speak up when something wasn't right. The Facebook page had transformed from a complaint forum into an actual community space where neighbors shared recommendations, organized events, and helped each other out. Mrs. Chen brought me dumplings again, this time with a note thanking me for clearing the road to her house during the dispute. "You probably saved my life," the note said. I tried to tell her that was an exaggeration, but she wouldn't hear it. The lawsuit against Deborah and the other former board members was settled 8 months later. They agreed to repay $175,000 to the HOA over a 5-year period. It wasn't everything they'd taken, but it was enough to replenish the reserve fund and cover several years of properly managed snow removal. Deborah herself moved out of Cascade Ridge 6 months after the recall. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she'd gotten a job in Denver and decided she wanted to live in a high-rise condo downtown, somewhere with no HOA responsibilities. I didn't wish her ill, but I couldn't say I was sorry to see her go. The following winter was the smoothest snow season Cascade Ridge had ever experienced. The contract with Rocky Mountain Snow Services was working well, and I was handling the lighter storms with my plow truck. Marcus had instituted regular board meetings with detailed financial reports, and resident participation was at an all-time high. One evening in December, almost exactly a year after the first fine that had started everything, I was clearing my driveway after a moderate snowfall when Marcus walked over with 2 bottles of beer. "Thought you could use a break," he said, handing me one. I turned off the snowblower and accepted the beer gratefully. We stood in my driveway, watching the snow fall in the streetlights, and didn't say anything for a while. "You know," Marcus finally said, "I never thought I'd be HOA president. It's a lot of work. You're doing a great job. Thanks. But I've been thinking about everything that happened last year, and I realized something. If you hadn't stood up to Deborah, none of this would have changed. We'd still be getting ripped off, and nobody would even know it. I just got tired of being pushed around. It was more than that, though. You were willing to be unpopular, to have people angry at you because you knew it was the right thing to do. That takes guts." I took a sip of my beer, feeling uncomfortable with the praise. "I don't know about that. I was pretty much just being stubborn. Stubborn for the right reasons." "There's a difference." Marcus raised his bottle. "To standing your ground." I clinked my bottle against his. "To standing your ground." We finished our beers and Marcus headed home. I fired up the snowblower again and completed my driveway, making sure to finish well within the 24-hour window. Not because I was worried about a fine, but because it felt good to take care of my property and know that I was part of a community that actually functioned the way it was supposed to. The next morning, I got an email from the HOA. For a moment, old anxiety spiked through me, expecting another violation notice. But it was just the monthly newsletter, now 4 pages long and full of actual useful information about community events, financial reports, and upcoming maintenance. At the bottom was a note from Marcus. "Thanks to all residents for your patience during the snow removal process. Special thanks to Nathan Richardson for his continued assistance with neighborhood plowing. We're lucky to have neighbors who care about our community." I smiled and closed the email. It had been a long, difficult journey from that first absurd fine to this point, but it had been worth it. Sometimes standing up for yourself meant standing up for everyone, even when they didn't realize they needed someone to fight for them. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. I opened it to find Jennifer from across the street holding a plate of cookies. "Peace offering," she said. "I know I was one of the people who got mad at you during the whole snow removal thing. I didn't understand what was really going on. I'm sorry." "You don't need to apologize." "I do, though. You were trying to fix a real problem, and I was just thinking about my own inconvenience. That wasn't fair to you." I accepted the cookies. "Thanks, Jennifer. That means a lot." After she left, I sat down at my kitchen table and looked out at the snow-covered neighborhood. Cascade Ridge wasn't perfect. It probably never would be. But it was home, and it was a home worth fighting for. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Don't forget, Emma's school play is tonight at 7. You better not be out plowing," I texted back. "Wouldn't miss it. The neighborhood can wait." And it could. That was the thing I'd learned through all of this. The neighborhood, the HOA, the rules and regulations, they were all important, but they weren't more important than the people they were supposed to serve. Deborah had forgotten that, lost in her power trip and her need to control everything and everyone around her. But the new board understood it. Marcus understood it. And slowly, the rest of the neighborhood was understanding it too. We weren't just houses in a development. We were a community of actual people with lives and families and problems and joys. When we treated each other that way, everything else fell into place. That evening, I sat in the audience at Emma's school and watched her perform in the winter concert. She was a snowflake in the chorus, one of 20 kids in white tutus and glitter makeup. She looked so proud and happy up there on stage, and I realized that this was what mattered. not HOA disputes or violation notices or power struggles. Just being present for the people I loved and the community I'd chosen to be part of. After the concert, we went out for ice cream despite the cold weather. Emma chattered about the performance, about how she'd almost forgotten her part but remembered just in time, about how her friend Sophia had tripped but recovered so gracefully that nobody really noticed. Sarah held my hand across the table and smiled at me, and I felt a deep contentment settle over me. When we got home, I checked the weather forecast out of habit. Another storm was coming in 3 days, this one promising to be significant. 12 to 18 inches, the meteorologist said. I made a mental note to check my plow attachment and make sure I had enough fuel for the truck. Then I closed the weather app and put my phone away. There would be time to worry about snow later. For now, I had my family, my home, and a neighborhood that finally felt like it was working the way it should. That was enough. The storm that came 3 days later was everything the forecasters predicted and more. 20 inches fell over a 36-hour period, creating massive drifts and shutting down most of Boulder County. But Cascade Ridge was ready. Rocky Mountain Snow Services had their crews out during the storm, keeping the main roads passable. I cleared my driveway in shifts, going out every few hours to keep ahead of the accumulation. By the time the snow stopped, our neighborhood was in better shape than most of the surrounding areas. The Facebook page filled with grateful comments and photos of clear streets. Several people posted pictures of their kids building snowmen in yards that were accessible because they could actually get home from work. Someone created a meme thanking the new HOA board, and it got shared dozens of times. It was a far cry from the anger and division of the previous year. We'd gone from a neighborhood on the brink of civil war to a community that actually functioned and supported each other. And while I couldn't take all the credit for that transformation, I knew that my decision to stand up to Deborah had been the catalyst for change. Marcus called me after the storm. Just wanted to say thanks for being on standby. Rocky Mountain did great, but it was nice knowing we had backup if we needed it. That's what neighbors are for. Speaking of which, the board voted last night to give you a bonus for your work this winter. We've been underpaying you compared to what we're paying the commercial service per hour of actual plowing. It's not a huge amount, but we wanted to recognize your contribution. You don't have to do that. I know we don't, but we want to. Let us do this, Nathan. Let us show you that we value what you do. I accepted the bonus, not because I needed the money, but because Marcus was right. It mattered to acknowledge people's contributions, to show appreciation rather than taking things for granted. That was the lesson Deborah had never learned, and it was why her reign as HOA president had ended in disaster. Spring came eventually, as it always does in Colorado. The snow melted, revealing lawns that needed attention and flower beds that needed planting. The HOA organized a neighborhood cleanup day, something that hadn't happened in years under Deborah's leadership. Nearly every household sent at least one person to help pick up litter, trim common areas, and spruce up the entrance. I spent the morning working alongside my neighbors, people I'd lived near for 5 years but barely knew. We talked and laughed and shared stories about the winter that had changed everything. Several people thanked me again for standing up to the old board. Others shared their own stories of ridiculous fines and petty enforcement that had made their lives miserable. I got fined $200 for having a basketball hoop in my driveway, one guy told me. Deborah said it violated the aesthetic standards. My kid was 8 years old. Where else was he supposed to play basketball? I got fined for parking my car on the street overnight when my garage door opener broke, someone else said. It was literally one night while I waited for the repair guy, and she hit me with $100 fine. The stories went on and on, a catalog of petty tyranny that painted a picture of just how bad things had gotten. But they were all in the past now. The new board had rescinded dozens of outstanding fines, determining that most of them were either excessive or unjustified in the first place. They'd also simplified the rules, focusing on things that actually mattered for property values and safety rather than arbitrary aesthetic preferences. By the end of the cleanup day, Cascade Ridge looked better than it had in years. The common areas were neat and tidy, the entrance was freshly mulched and planted with flowers, and a new sign welcomed visitors to our community. It was a small thing, but it felt significant. We were taking pride in where we lived again. That evening, there was a community barbecue at the park in the center of the neighborhood. Families brought food to share. Kids ran around playing tag and flying kites, and adults stood in small groups talking and laughing. It felt like the neighborhood I'd imagined when Sarah and I first moved to Cascade Ridge, the kind of community where people actually knew and cared about each other. I was manning one of the grills, flipping burgers and hot dogs, when Mrs. Chen approached with her son. "Nathan," she said, her English heavily accented but clear, "I want to thank you properly. You helped me when I needed it most. You are a good man." "It was nothing, Mrs. Chen. Anyone would have done the same." "No," she said firmly, "not anyone. You did when it cost you something. That is what makes it special." Her son handed me a small wrapped package. Inside was a jade figurine of a guardian lion. "My mother wants you to have this. It's been in our family for 3 generations. She says you are a guardian for this neighborhood, and she wants you to have a proper guardian symbol." I tried to refuse, saying it was too much, but Mrs. Chen wouldn't hear it. "Please," she said, "let an old woman give thanks the way she knows how." I accepted the figurine, touched beyond words. It now sits on a shelf in my living room, a reminder of why I'd fought so hard against the HOA's corruption. Not for myself, though I'd certainly benefited, but for people like Mrs. Chen, who needed a community that actually functioned and cared about its residents. The rest of the spring and summer passed peacefully. The HOA board continued to operate transparently, holding monthly meetings that residents actually attended. Finances were posted online for anyone to review. Decisions were made collectively rather than by executive fiat. It was boring in the best possible way, the kind of boring that meant things were working as they should. I saw Deborah one more time, completely by accident. Sarah and I were having dinner at a restaurant in Denver when she walked in with a man I didn't recognize. She saw me, and for a moment our eyes met. I nodded politely. She looked away quickly and was seated on the other side of the restaurant. "Was that her?" Sarah asked quietly. "Yeah." "How do you feel?" I thought about it. "I don't feel anything, really. I'm not angry anymore. I'm not happy to see her struggle. I'm just glad we fixed the problem she caused." And that was true. The anger that had driven me through the winter had faded, replaced by satisfaction in what we'd accomplished and gratitude for the community we'd built. Deborah Patterson was just a person who'd made some bad choices and paid the price for them. She wasn't worth any more of my emotional energy. The following winter was my 4th snow season helping Cascade Ridge, but my first doing it under a proper arrangement. Rocky Mountain Snow Services handled the heavy lifting, and I provided supplemental clearing and emergency access as needed. It worked smoothly, and for the first time in years, nobody complained about snow removal. Not because there was nothing to complain about, but because everyone understood that we were all doing our best within reasonable constraints. Marcus finished his first full year as HOA president and announced he'd be running for a second term. Nobody opposed him. Jennifer ran for vice president again and won easily. The board had found its rhythm, and residents were happy to let them continue their work. At the annual HOA meeting, Marcus gave a presentation on everything that had been accomplished over the past year. Finances were stable and transparent. Common areas were well maintained. Rules were reasonable and fairly enforced. Resident satisfaction, measured by an anonymous survey, was at 92%, up from 38% the year before under Deborah's leadership. "I want to take a moment to acknowledge the person who made all of this possible," Marcus said, and I suddenly realized he was looking at me. Nathan Richardson could have just paid his fines and moved on. Instead, he stood up for what was right, even when it was difficult and unpopular. He reminded us that HOAs are supposed to serve their residents, not the other way around. So I'd like everyone to join me in thanking Nathan for his courage and his commitment to our community. The room erupted in applause. I felt my face flush as people turned to look at me, many of them smiling and nodding. Sarah squeezed my hand, and Emma, who was now old enough to understand what was happening, looked at me with pride in her eyes. "Thanks, Dad," she whispered. "You're like a superhero." I laughed. "I'm not a superhero, sweetie. I'm just a guy who got tired of being pushed around." "That's what superheroes do, though," she insisted. "They stand up to bad guys." Maybe she was right in her own way. Maybe standing up to small injustices was its own kind of heroism, even if it didn't involve capes or special powers. Maybe the real heroes were the people who said enough when everyone else was too tired or scared to speak up. After the meeting, dozens of people came up to thank me personally or share their own stories about dealing with Deborah. It was cathartic, I think, for all of us to acknowledge what we'd been through and celebrate how far we'd come. As Sarah, Emma, and I walked home through the quiet neighborhood streets, I thought about everything that had happened since that first ridiculous fine 2 years ago. The anger, the confrontation, the uncertainty, the resolution. It had been one of the most stressful periods of my life, but also one of the most rewarding. "Do you regret it?" Sarah asked, reading my thoughts like she often did. "Everything you went through?" "No," I said without hesitation. "It was hard, but it was worth it. Look at what we have now. Look at what we built." She smiled and leaned into me as we walked. "I'm proud of you. I know I already said that, but I mean it. You could have just let it go, but you didn't. You fought for something bigger than yourself." "I fought because I was stubborn and angry." "You fought because you knew it was right. There's a difference." Maybe there was. Maybe my motives had been a mix of principle and pride, justice and stubbornness. But in the end, the motives didn't matter as much as the results. Cascade Ridge was a better place to live. The HOA served its residents instead of exploiting them. And I'd learned that sometimes the right thing to do was also the hardest thing to do, and that was okay. We reached our house, and I looked at it with fresh appreciation. The mortgage still had 23 years left on it. The roof would need replacing in another decade. The water heater was making concerning noises that suggested its days were numbered. But it was home, in a neighborhood that felt like a real community, and that was worth everything I'd fought for. Inside, Emma ran upstairs to get ready for bed. Sarah started making tea, and I stood in our living room, looking at the jade guardian lion Mrs. Chen had given me. In the soft lamplight, it seemed almost alive, watchful and protective. My phone buzzed. A message from Marcus. "Storm coming Thursday. 12 to 15 inches, just a heads up." I texted back, "Got it, I'll be ready." And I would be. Not because I had to be, not because I was afraid of fines or consequences, but because this was my community, these were my neighbors, and helping them was what neighbors did for each other. That was the simple truth I'd learned through all of this. Communities worked when people looked out for each other, when they were willing to contribute without being forced, and when they held their leaders accountable for serving rather than ruling. It wasn't complicated. It was just human nature at its best, as opposed to the petty tyranny that brought out human nature at its worst. Thursday's storm came right on schedule, dropping 14 inches of heavy, wet snow that was difficult to move but beautiful to look at. I was out early with my snowblower, clearing my driveway in the pre-dawn darkness. Rocky Mountain's crews were already working on the main roads, their yellow lights flashing through the falling snow. By the time the sun came up, the neighborhood was clear and functioning. People headed to work, kids waited for school buses, and life went on normally despite the significant snowfall. It was unremarkable in the best possible way, the kind of boring success that meant systems were working as they should. And that, I realized, was the real victory. Not the dramatic confrontation with Deborah, not the recall election, not even the recovery of the embezzled funds. The real victory was this: a neighborhood that functioned smoothly, residents who trusted their HOA board, and a community that took care of each other without drama or conflict. It had taken a fight to get here, but the fight was over now. What remained was the ordinary, everyday work of being good neighbors to each other. And that, I thought as I put away my snowblower and headed inside for a hot shower, was exactly as it should be: the end.